Hey, quick question. When someone says, "Oh great, another Monday," do you laugh? Or do you feel personally attacked? Because if you laughed, congratulations, you might be Gen X. Or you've been spending way too much time around them. Which, honestly, same thing. See, there's this generation walking around right now, born roughly between 1965 and 1980, and they have this superpower that nobody really talks about. It's not productivity hacks. It's not vision boards. It's not a 5-step morning routine with cold plunges and gratitude journaling. It's sarcasm. Pure, beautiful, razor-sharp sarcasm. And I know what you're thinking. Lots of people are sarcastic, sure. But Gen X didn't just stumble into sarcasm. They built it, from scratch, with their bare hands, while their parents were at work, literally. Because here's the thing that most people don't understand about Gen X, and this is the part that actually blew my mind when I started digging into it. Their sarcasm isn't just a personality quirk. It's a survival mechanism. It's armor. It's the emotional language of a generation that was basically handed a house key, told dinner's in the fridge, and left to figure out the rest on their own. So today, we're going deep. We're talking about where Gen X sarcasm actually came from, why it hits different from any other generation's humor, and what it actually says about the world they grew up in. Stick around because by the end of this, you're either going to have a whole new respect for the Gen Xer in your life, or you're going to finally understand why you are the way you are. Let's go. So first, let me paint you a picture. It's 1978, maybe 1982, maybe 1985. The year doesn't matter that much. What matters is the scene. It's 3:30 in the afternoon. School just let out, and a kid, maybe 9 years old, maybe 11, is walking home alone. They've got a key on a string around their neck. That key is going to open the front door of a house where nobody is home. Mom's working. Dad's working. Or maybe dad left and mom's working double shifts. Or maybe there are two parents, but both of them are absolutely exhausted and emotionally unavailable in the specific way that the 1970s and 80s seem to produce in adults. The kid comes home, makes a snack, watches TV, and not the curated educational content kind. We're talking cartoons where characters get hit with frying pans and just spin around dazed with little stars above their heads. We're talking news coverage of nuclear threats, the Cold War, AIDS, economic recessions, and Ronald Reagan saying, "Morning in America," while everything around this kid felt like anything but. They're absorbing all of it, alone, processing it, alone, making sense of the world, alone. And then their parents come home and ask, "How was school?" And the kid says, "Oh, fantastic. Truly the highlight of my existence." And that, my friends, is the birth of Gen X sarcasm. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Because we throw around the word sarcasm all the time, but what Gen Xers developed is something a little more sophisticated than just being a wise guy. It's called irony. And yes, there's a difference. Sarcasm is saying the opposite of what you mean, usually with an edge. "Oh wow, you're so helpful." That's sarcasm. Irony is a little deeper. It's the recognition that the world often presents itself as one thing while being another. And instead of crying about that gap, you laugh at it. You point at it. You make a little flag and plant it right there in the contradiction and go, "I see you. I'm not fooled." And also kind of hilarious, right? Gen X mastered irony because they lived in it. They were sold a version of childhood. Happy families, safe neighborhoods, stable futures, that the actual evidence around them completely contradicted. Their TV said, "Family values." Their reality said, "You're going to be home alone until 6 p.m., kid. Good luck." So, they developed this finely tuned detector, a kind of built-in radar for when something is being presented as one thing but is actually another. And instead of getting outraged, they got dry, detached, raised an eyebrow, said something devastatingly accurate with a completely flat effect, and moved on. That's not cynicism, by the way. People confuse the two all the time. Cynicism says everything is terrible and nothing matters. Gen X irony says everything is kind of absurd and I've made peace with that, but I'm not going to pretend it isn't. Huge difference. All right, let me give you some real examples because this is where it gets fun. That thing where a Gen Xer will just not be impressed. You tell them something exciting and they go, "Cool." Not cold, not rude, just measured. They've already run the numbers on how excited they're allowed to get before life inevitably disappoints them. That's not depression, that's calibrated expectation. Because these are people who watched brands lie to them their entire lives. They grew up during the era of big advertising. the golden age of this product will change your life, and they watched their parents buy into it. The dream house, the dream car, the dream everything. And then watched the recession come and take it, and then watched it happen again and again. So when a Gen Xer gives you the flat, cool, what they're actually saying is, I'm interested, but I'm not betting my emotional well-being on this yet. Show me more. Earn my enthusiasm. That's not armor against joy. That's armor against unnecessary pain. Here's another one, Gen X humor. Have you ever noticed that Gen X humor tends to reference the gap between what something claims to be and what it actually is? Think about the entertainment they grew up on. The Simpsons, Seinfeld, Office Space, Reality Bites, Clerks. What do all of those have in common? They're all about people who are supposed to be living the American dream. Good job, nice life, everything figured out. And instead they're standing in a parking lot at a dead-end job going, what is this? What are we doing here? Is this real life? That's Gen X's entire worldview in one image. And they didn't make it dark and depressing. They made it funny. They made it into art. Because what else do you do when you've been told the script one way your whole life, but the actual experience keeps going completely sideways? You laugh. You make a movie about it. You write a song about it. You stand at the copy machine and you quote Office Space to your coworker, and you both just nod slowly in the understanding of two people who have seen behind the curtain. That shared understanding, that mutual, unspoken, we both know how this works, is the glue of Gen X humor. It doesn't need to be explained. It just lands. Now let's talk about the Latchkey thing more specifically, because I think this is the piece that really shaped the whole psychology here. Latchkey kids who had unsupervised time at home because their parents were working, wasn't just a logistical thing. It was an emotional formation. Here's why. When you're a kid and you come home to an empty house every day, you have to develop a relationship with your own thoughts in a way that a constantly supervised child simply doesn't. You sit with boredom. You sit with fear sometimes. You sit with questions that have no one to answer them. You learn to self-regulate. You learn to problem solve. You learn to be okay on your own. And here's the sneaky thing that comes out of that. You become very hard to manipulate with emotion. Adults who grew up with high supervision often have a deep need for external validation and reassurance. Makes total sense. That's what they were trained to expect. But these Gen X kids, who were essentially their own company from age 8 onward, they got really good at checking in with themselves, really good at filtering noise, really good at smelling a sales pitch from 3 blocks away. So when someone comes at them with big manufactured enthusiasm, this is the greatest thing ever and you need to be excited right now. Their immediate internal response is not excitement, it's suspicion. And their external response is that half smile and that dry little comment that says, without saying, I don't think so, buddy. That's not Gen X being difficult. That's Gen X being the most emotionally self-sufficient generation of people to ever walk through a shopping mall. And they deserve some credit for that. Here's something that really gets me. Because we're in 2024 now, and Gen X is in their 40s and 50s, and there's this fascinating thing happening where the world is finally catching up to the things Gen X was sarcastic about decades ago. Corporations are bad for you? Gen X was making movies about that in 1991. Politicians aren't telling the whole truth? Gen X put that in bumper stickers in 1984. The media gives you a curated reality? Gen X was already skeptical of that, before the internet existed to prove it. The housing market is broken and upward mobility is largely a myth. Gen X watched their secure parents get laid off and lose houses in the 80s and 90s and has been making bitter jokes about it ever since. So now millennials and Gen Z are discovering these things and having these big, loud, emotional responses. The outrage, the manifestos, the protest movements, the online pile-ons. And Gen X is watching from the sideline going, we know, we've known, welcome. Not with cruelty, not with told you so energy. Just with that quiet, been there nod. Because see, that's another thing about Gen X irony. It's rarely mean-spirited. It doesn't punch down. The best Gen X sarcasm punches at systems, at institutions, at the absurd gap between promised and delivered. It's satirical, not sadistic. There's a big difference between making fun of an idea and making fun of a person. Gen X mostly went after ideas. Faulty systems, empty promises, hollow slogans. That's comedy with a conscience, even when it looks like it doesn't care about anything. Let me tell you about a friend of mine. I'll call him Dave, because honestly, there's always a Dave in this kind of story. Dave is a certified Gen Xer. Grew up in a mid-sized Midwest city, Both parents worked. He was home alone regularly from age 9. Classic Latchkey situation. Dave is the funniest person in any room he walks into, but he never tries to be funny. He just says exactly what he's thinking, with exactly zero theatrical embellishment, and the precision of it is so perfectly observed that you fall apart laughing. One time we were at a work meeting, the kind where a consultant is brought in to talk about synergizing corporate culture for Q3 impact outcomes. Lots of buzzwords, very expensive PowerPoint, zero content. Everyone else is nodding along, taking notes, doing the performance of engagement. Dave is sitting there, completely still, completely calm. And at the end, when the consultant asks, "So, any questions?" Dave goes, "Yeah. What does any of this mean in actual English?" Not angry, not aggressive, just genuine, honest, and devastating. The consultant laughed nervously. 3 people quit the company within a month. Coincidence? Maybe. But I think Dave just gave everyone permission to acknowledge what they were already thinking. That's what Gen X sarcasm does at its best. It names the thing. It's the kid in the emperor's new clothes, except instead of a kid, it's a 47-year-old in a fleece vest who is completely unbothered. There's also something important to say about what Gen X sarcasm protects. Because here's what a lot of people misread about this generation. They look at the dry humor and the eye rolls and the whatever energy and they think, these people don't care about anything. No. No. That is completely backward. Gen X cares intensely. They just learned very early that showing it unguarded gets you hurt. When you're a kid whose parents are physically absent or emotionally checked out, you learn that vulnerability is risky. You learn that hope, deployed too openly, comes with a price. You learn that the world will not always show up for you the way you need it to. So you build the armor, not to stop caring, but to protect the caring. The sarcasm is a shell around something genuinely tender. Ask a Gen Xer about something they actually love. A band from their youth, a movie from their formative years, a friendship that meant everything. And something shifts. The armor drops a little. There's real warmth underneath. Real nostalgia. Real emotion. They just don't hand that out at the door. You have to earn it. And the way you earn it is by showing them you're real. That you can handle honesty, that you're not going to shatter if they say something unvarnished, that you can sit with ambiguity and not need everything wrapped in a bow. Do that, and suddenly the dry, eye-rolling Gen Xer becomes one of the most loyal, insightful, and genuinely funny people you've ever known in your life. Now let me bring this back around to something practical, because this isn't just historical analysis. This stuff is alive and relevant right now. We are living in an era of extreme emotional performance. Everything has to be a reaction. Everything has to be loud and big and polarized. You're either completely passionate or you're a bad person. You're either all in or you're the enemy. Nuance is suspicious. Measured responses are mistaken for apathy. And in that environment, Gen X irony is almost, I would argue, necessary medicine. The ability to step back, to raise an eyebrow, to say, okay, but is this actually the most important thing that has ever happened, or are we being played a little bit? That skill, that calm, detached perspective, is genuinely valuable, not because nothing matters, but because if everything is treated as a 5-alarm emergency, eventually you lose the ability to identify the actual emergencies. Gen X learned that lesson as kids, watching the news cycle of the Cold War, watching panic used as a political tool, watching emotional manipulation deployed by everyone from advertisers to politicians to televangelists. They learned, if someone really, really needs me to be scared or angry right now, that's probably worth examining before I comply. That's not passivity, that's discernment, and the world right now needs more of it. There's one more piece I want to hit before we wrap this up, and it's about the relationship between Gen X irony and creativity. Because here's the fascinating thing. The same distance that makes Gen X seem detached, that same distance is what makes them extraordinary creative observers. When you're not fully invested in the surface performance of things, you see the structure underneath. You see the machinery. You see the gap between the mask and the face. And when you put that into art, when you make music or film or writing from that place of clear-eyed, affectionate but not fooled observation, you get something true, something that doesn't age, something that people from any generation can look at and go, yeah, that's real. That's why so much Gen X cultural output still holds up decades later. Kurt Cobain singing about the performance of authenticity, Quentin Tarantino's detached love letter to the absurdity of genre, David Fincher's cold-eyed examination of what ambition actually costs. Daria Morgendorffer staring at a world that keeps asking her to pretend things are fine and just not doing it. These are not the products of people who don't care. These are the products of people who care so much that they couldn't accept the comfortable lie. Who looked at the script the world handed them and said, "I don't think so. Let me write a different one." That's sarcasm as art. That's irony as a creative force. That's the Latchkey kid, alone in the house at 4 in the afternoon, deciding that if the world isn't going to be what it promised, then at least they were going to see it clearly. And honestly, I think there's something kind of beautiful in that. In a world that was constantly trying to sell them something, a lifestyle, an ideology, a version of happiness that required purchasing something, Gen X looked around, said, "Nah," and built their own value system from scratch, based not on what they were told to want, but on what actually made sense when you sat alone with it for a while and thought it through. Is it a little prickly? Sure. Is it sometimes hard to reach? Yeah. Does it occasionally mistake genuine enthusiasm for naivety? Probably. But show me a generation that doesn't have its defensive reflexes, and I'll show you a generation that hasn't survived anything yet. Gen X survived, with a key around their neck and a raised eyebrow and a joke so dry it could sand wood. And they came out the other side with something rare, a genuine relationship with reality. Not the reality they were sold, the actual one. And if that means the rest of us sometimes get a flat, when we expect applause, honestly, we probably needed to hear that. All right, if you made it this far, first of all, you're clearly a person of excellent taste and possibly questionable life choices, and I respect both. Second, you now know more about why the Gen X in your life is the way they are than most people ever figure out. Use that power wisely. If this video made you think, made you laugh, or made you call your Gen X sibling and go, "Wait, I finally get you," then hit that like button. Seriously. It helps more than you think and costs you approximately 0 energy. And if you want more videos like this, deep dives into the psychology of generations, the hidden stories behind cultural patterns and why people are the way they are, then subscribe. Hit the bell. Join the chaos. We drop new stuff regularly, and I promise it's always worth your time. Drop in the comments, are you Gen X? Or do you have a Gen X person in your life who makes perfect sense now? I genuinely want to know. The comments section is always the best part, and I read more of them than I'll ever publicly admit. See you in the next one, which will be great. Truly, the highlight of your week.